Widowed farmer rescues young woman tied up on the banks of a river with alligators. See this emotional story. He thought he would only find his lost horse, but saw a desperate scene at the riverbank. A pregnant young woman was tied up, about to be devoured by alligators. Without thinking twice, he jumped into the water and saved her. What came next transformed both their lives forever. If this story interests you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us what city you're watching from. We continue. I promise this will be the best story you'll ever hear in your life. The days dragged on like dust carried by the dry wind. Frank observed the yellowed horizon as the sun descended lazily behind the hills. Hope Ranch, once so full of life, now seemed merely a shadow of what it had been. Since Ellen had departed this world 3 years ago, he lived between habit and emptiness. The whistle of the kettle was his companion on cold mornings. The walls of the house held echoes of laughter that no longer existed. The land, like his heart, was barren. The sound of dry branches, the distant lowing of cattle, the creaking of gates were all the company that remained. The longing no longer hurt as before. It had become part of the landscape, like the field that no longer sprouted, like the silent house. His only purpose was to keep alive the patch of garden that Ellen had cared for so much. That garden, now diminished, was the last tangible connection to the woman he had loved for 4 decades. The rest was survival. "Dad?" Jessica's voice echoed through the phone. "Are you okay?" "I am, daughter, as always. You know you can come live with me in Chicago. We've already talked about this. My place is here." The repeated conversation ended, as always, with vague promises of visits and a heavy silence that said more than words. Jessica, his only daughter, had followed her path in the big city. A competent lawyer, she had built a life far from that rural reality. Visits had become rare, reduced to holidays and birthdays. On that stuffy February afternoon, Frank noticed that Buck, his most stubborn horse, had escaped again. Grumbling softly, he followed the marks left in the dusty ground. The trail led to Gator Creek, which cut through the back of the property. The sun was beginning to set when Frank spotted the horse drinking water peacefully on the bank. It was then that he noticed something strange in the murky waters. A figure was moving, struggling between sinking and surrendering to the current. It wasn't an accidental fall. It was a deliberate attempt. Frank felt a tightness in his chest. He dropped Buck's reins and ran toward the river. The soaked body of a young woman was fighting less and less against the force of the water. Her lost eyes and marked wrists said more than any word. Further ahead, the metallic glint of alligator's eyes made the current seem like an ominous warning. Without thinking twice, Frank jumped into the muddy water, ignoring the risks. His heavy boots made movement difficult, but he advanced with determination. When he finally reached the young woman, she was no longer resisting. It was as if she had accepted the end. With effort, he pulled her to the shore, moving her away from the danger of the waters and the predators that inhabited them. "Miss, talk to me." Frank tried in vain to get some response. She was breathing, but her eyes remained closed. She didn't appear to be more than 30 years old. Her face, even pale and wet, held a suffering beauty. Her soaked clothes revealed a fragile body, and Frank then noticed something he hadn't perceived before, a small bulge in her belly. The woman was pregnant. With redoubled care, Frank carried her in his arms to his pickup truck. Buck would have to find his way back alone. There was a greater emergency. During the journey to the house, the young woman mumbled disconnected words. "He will find me. I can't go on. My baby." Phrases interspersed with sobs and tremors. "So." The simple but welcoming house, Frank placed her in his own room. He quickly changed the sheets, fetched dry towels and clothes that had belonged to Ellen. He hesitated to call a doctor. The nearest health clinic was 40 minutes away, and night was falling. He decided to wait until dawn, monitoring the stranger's breathing. During the night, she had a fever. Frank applied cold water compresses to her forehead, offered lemon balm tea when she briefly opened her eyes, and watched over her restless sleep. For 3 days, the young woman alternated between sleep and wakefulness, eating little, startled by any noise. Her trembling hands rested on her womb as if they wanted to protect the little that still remained intact. On the fourth day, she finally managed to sit up in bed. She looked around, confused, trying to understand where she was. "You saved me?" she asked in a hoarse voice. "I found you in the river. My name is Frank, and I'm Sarah." She instinctively touched her belly. "And this is Michael." "You already know it's a boy?" A brief smile illuminated the tired face. "I'm certain. I feel he's a warrior, as he'll need to be." Gradually, fragments of her story emerged. Sarah had fled from a marriage that began with promises of love and ended in an emotional prison. Her husband, Eric, a respected businessman in the neighboring town, hid behind the facade of a successful man and obsessive controller. "It started with small things," she recounted, looking out the window. "Jealousy of my work as a teacher, complaints about my clothes, criticism of my friends. Then came the threats, the isolation, the control of my every step." When she discovered the pregnancy, Sarah imagined that everything would improve. For a few weeks, Eric did indeed seem to change. He bought gifts for the baby, planned the room, showed attentiveness. But soon the possessive behavior returned, now amplified. He said that now I was tied to him forever, that he would never let me leave with his son. The escape was a gap won with desperation. After weeks of silence and aggression, Eric had traveled on business. Sarah took the little money she had managed to hide over the months and left without a destination. The idea was to disappear, not out of courage, but out of exhaustion. When I reached the river and saw those waters, Sarah closed her eyes, unable to continue. "You don't need to talk about it," Frank gently interrupted. The silence that followed was like a pact. He would not ask more. She would tell when she was ready. In the days that followed, Sarah began to regain her strength. Color gradually returned to her face. Her gaze, previously constantly frightened, now fixed with curiosity on the objects in the house. One afternoon she ventured into the yard. She touched the dried earth, examined the withered plants in the old garden. Frank observed her from a distance, recognizing in those gestures a familiarity that made his chest tighten. "This garden was once very beautiful," he commented, approaching. "Who took care of it?" "Ellen, my wife." "Where is she now?" Frank looked at the horizon. "She left 3 years ago, a cancer that gave no chance." Sarah nodded, understanding the weight of those simple words. "I'm sorry. I promised to keep this part of the garden alive. It was her favorite spot." That same night, the sound of the pot bubbling on the stove replaced the wind whistling through the cracks. The aroma of home-cooked food filled the house. Sarah had prepared a simple but tasty dinner with the few ingredients available in the pantry. "You didn't have to trouble yourself," said Frank, sitting at the table. "It's no trouble. It's the least I can do for now." As they ate, a light rain began to fall, the first after months of drought. The drumming of drops on the roof sounded like music. Frank observed how Sarah closed her eyes for a moment, savoring that sound. The previously grey environment was slowly being inhabited by life again. The bond between them grew unhurriedly. It was different from the love that Frank had lost, but equally true. A tenderness that flourished between the cracks of shared pain, watered by the rain that finally came to relieve the dryness of the earth and perhaps of hearts. The following weeks brought an unexpected routine to Hope Ranch. Frank woke up to the smell of fresh coffee, something he had forgotten how good it was. Sarah, now in her 5th month of pregnancy, showed renewed energy. Mornings were dedicated to reconstructing the abandoned garden. Afternoons, to small repairs in the house that Frank had postponed for so long. The 6th month of pregnancy arrived, with the first seedlings sprouting in the revitalized soil. Tomatoes, lettuce, carrots, basil. Colors returned to paint that piece of ground that had remained forgotten for so long. Sarah talked to the plants as she watered them, as if each was a promise of future. "You talk to them the same way Ellen did," Frank commented one morning, watching her kneeling among the beds. Sarah smiled without taking her eyes off the seedlings. "My grandmother used to say that plants are like people. They need affection, attention, and good conversations to grow strong. Your grandmother seemed to be a wise woman." She raised me after my parents were gone. She was the strongest person I knew. Sarah paused, gently caressing her belly. I wish she could meet Michael. Daily coexistence revealed deeper layers of their stories. Frank discovered that Sarah had been a literature teacher at a public school. Passionate about poetry, she used to memorize verses and recite them while working in the garden. Sarah, in turn, met the Frank that existed beyond the taciturn and solitary man, a former geography teacher who had abandoned the city to dedicate himself to the ranch inherited from his parents. On a particularly hot afternoon, Frank found Sarah organizing dusty books on the small bookshelf in the living room. Neruda, Frost, Emily Dickinson, she read the spines with admiration. I didn't imagine you liked poetry. Actually, those were Ellen's. She taught English at the rural school nearby. Sarah carefully removed a copy of Robert Frost's complete poems. When she opened it, a photo fell out. A grey-haired woman with a luminous smile posed alongside Frank in front of the same garden that was now being reborn. Ellen was beautiful, Sarah commented, observing the photograph. Yes, she was, inside and out. That night after dinner, Frank found Sarah on the porch contemplating the starry sky. He sat beside her in silence. Words weren't necessary. Their mutual company already said enough. "Thank you," she finally murmured. "For what?" "For not asking questions, for giving me space, for not judging me." "I don't have that right." Sarah took a deep breath as if gathering courage. "He will look for me. Eric isn't the type of man who accepts losing what he considers his property. You're safe here. You don't know him, and he doesn't know me." The conviction in Frank's voice brought momentary comfort, but both knew that peace was fragile, sustained only by distance and time. One night, Sarah's screams cut through the silence of the early morning. Frank ran to the room where she slept, finding her sitting in bed, panicking, her whole body trembling. "He was here, he found me," she shouted, frantically looking at the corners of the room. "It was just a nightmare, Sarah. You're safe." Frank turned on the lamp, showing that there was no one there but them. He sat on the edge of the bed and hesitantly held the young woman's trembling hands. "Breathe with me." Slowly. Gradually, Sarah's breathing calmed. The tears, however, continued to fall. In the dream, he took Michael away. He said I would never see him again, that it was the price for having run away. That disorderly crying brought to the surface suffocated memories. The constant fear, the insults, the promise of a tragic end if she tried to leave. There, in that moment of shared vulnerability, the two recognized each other deeply. He, in the pain of one who has already lost. She in the relief of being heard without judgment. "When Ellen was in her last days," Frank began, his voice almost a whisper, "she made me promise that I would continue living, not just existing, but truly living. It took 3 years for me to understand the difference." Sarah looked at him with still moist eyes. "And now you understand?" "I'm beginning to understand." The bond between them grew without haste and without pressure. It was different from traditional romantic love. It was deeper, built on foundations of shared pain and mutual hope. It was more than refuge. It was a joint reconstruction. One morning, while Frank was fixing a broken fence, Sarah appeared running, her face illuminated by a smile. "He's kicking. Come feel." Without thinking, she took Frank's calloused hand and placed it on her belly. Seconds later, a firm movement was felt under his fingers. The smile that appeared on the man's face was the most genuine in years. "This boy is going to be a soccer player," he joked, still amazed by the sensation. Sarah laughed, a crystalline laugh that seemed to clean the air around. "Or a dancer. Let's not impose stereotypes on Michael before he's even born." That simple moment marked a turning point in their coexistence. The increasingly evident presence of Michael, confirmed by his vigorous movements, brought a new dimension to their relationship. They were not just two wounded adults seeking healing. They were also guardians of a new life that was forming, full of possibilities. Preparations for the baby's arrival began. Frank cleared out the room that had been Jessica's in childhood. He painted the walls a soft blue, fixed the old wooden dresser, built a crib with his own hands. Sarah sewed new curtains and small sheets with fabrics she found stored in old trunks. "This crib turned out perfect," she commented, running her hand over the smooth, well-finished wood. "I made a similar one when Jessica was born," Ellen insisted. "It should be handmade with care. Ellen seems to have been a very special woman. Yes, you two would have gotten along well. She also believed in new beginnings." The mention of his daughter brought a shadow to Frank's face. The relationship with Jessica had become increasingly distant since Ellen's departure. The calls were brief and formal, the visits rare. He knew he needed to tell her about Sarah, but feared his daughter's reaction. On a Sunday afternoon, Frank finally took courage. He called Jessica and, without going into many details, told her he was sheltering a pregnant young woman who needed help. The silence on the other end of the line was followed by direct and practical questions. Who is she? Where did she come from? How long will she stay? Her name is Sarah. She's fleeing from an abusive relationship and she'll stay as long as she needs. Dad, don't you think you're being naive? You barely know this woman. Sometimes, daughter, we know a person in weeks more than others in years. The conversation ended with Jessica promising to visit soon to assess the situation. Frank knew his daughter was just concerned, but still felt like a teenager being questioned about his actions. The fear that both Frank and Sarah tried to keep at a distance materialized on a sunny morning. A black, shiny, expensive car parked on the dirt road leading to the ranch. A tall man of impeccable appearance remained at the wheel, observing the house with binoculars. Frank was in the barn when he noticed the presence of the vehicle. Sarah on the porch felt the air leave her lungs as she recognized Eric's car. The mere glimpse of that silhouette was enough to rekindle all the fear she desperately tried to overcome. "It's him," she whispered, retreating into the house like a cornered animal. Frank entered quickly, closing all doors and windows. "He won't get near you, trust me." The car remained parked for almost an hour. Eric didn't get out, didn't approach. He just observed. It was a tactic that Sarah knew well. Constant surveillance, the silent reminder that she was being watched. When he finally left, he left behind a cloud of red dust. The house had shadows again that day. Sarah retreated to her room, refusing to come out even for meals. Frank respected her space, leaving a tray of food at the door. At night, he found her sitting on the bed, staring fixedly at the wall. "He'll come back," she said, her voice devoid of emotion. "And he won't be alone." "Then we won't be alone either," Frank replied, determined. That same night, he made a call. It was time to ask for help. Jessica needed to come immediately. It was no longer just a visit to assess the situation. It was a family emergency. Jessica arrived the next day, driving her compact car along the dirt road, with the urgency of someone answering a vital call. The 35-year-old lawyer carried not only a small suitcase, but also a folder full of documents. Her eyes, so similar to her father's, examined the ranch with nostalgia and concern. Frank was waiting for her on the porch, his face marked by the fatigue of a poorly slept night. "Dad," she hugged him firmly, "you look exhausted." "I'm fine, daughter. Thank you for coming so quickly." "Where is she?" "In the bedroom. She hasn't come out since yesterday." Jessica entered the house that was once her home, noticing the small changes. Vases with fresh flowers on the table, new curtains, a different arrangement of furniture. They were subtle signs of a female presence she hadn't seen there since her mother's departure. "You know what you're doing is dangerous, don't you?" she asked, lowering her voice. "Sheltering a woman who's running from her husband?" "I couldn't leave her to her own fate. There are shelters for women in situations of violence, institutions prepared to deal with these cases." She tried to take her own life, Jessica, in our river. I thought that meant something. His daughter sighed, recognizing in that stubborn tone the same man who had raised her. She placed the folder on the table. "I brought some documents that might help. Forms for requesting a protective order, guidance on how to file a police report, contacts for safe shelters in nearby cities." Frank nodded, grateful for the practical help. "I'll introduce you." Sarah was sitting on the edge of the bed when she heard the soft knock on the door. Reluctantly, she allowed entry. Her eyes, marked by deep, dark circles, met Jessica's with a mixture of fear and hope. This is my daughter, Jessica. She's a lawyer in Chicago and came to help us. I'm sorry for the trouble, said Sarah, instinctively placing her hands on her prominent belly. Jessica carefully observed the young woman before her. She didn't seem to be the type of person who tries to take advantage of a lonely, elderly man as she had initially feared. There was a genuine fragility in her, mixed with an inner strength that revealed itself in her upright posture, despite the evident fear. It's no trouble, she finally replied. But we need to talk about your legal situation. In the days that followed, Jessica tried to better understand the bond between Sarah and her father. She questioned the young woman's presence, the hidden intentions, the dependence that seemed to be forming. As a lawyer accustomed to family cases, she knew well the various forms of manipulation. But time showed that there was no game or pretense there. There were just two wounded people seeking healing in each other's presence. One night, while Frank was tending to the cattle, Jessica found Sarah in the kitchen, preparing dinner. You like him, don't you? She asked directly. Sarah stopped stirring the pot, considering the question. Your father saved me in all possible ways, not just from the water, but from myself, from my giving up. That doesn't answer my question. Yes, I like him, Sarah admitted, turning to Jessica. Not in the way you're imagining, perhaps. It's a feeling different from anything I've ever experienced. It's pure. Jessica nodded, reflecting on those words. He smiles more now. I hadn't seen him smile like this since before Mom got sick. Your mother must have been an incredible woman. She was, and she would be happy to see the garden alive again. That sincere conversation paved the way for a nascent trust between the two women. Jessica began to share stories from childhood, on the ranch, showing old photos, revealing a side of Frank that Sarah still didn't know, the playful father, the loving husband, the respected teacher who had abandoned his career to dedicate himself to the land when his wife fell ill. On the third day of Jessica's visit, she finally convinced Sarah to formally request a protective order against Eric. Together, they prepared the necessary documentation, gathering evidence of the abuse, threatening messages saved on the old cell phone that Sarah kept hidden, photos of bruises taken in secret, a diary where she recorded episodes of psychological violence. Tomorrow we'll go to the women's police station in the neighboring town, Jessica explained. It's safer than going to the local police, where Eric might have contacts. Sarah agreed, feeling a mixture of fear and relief. It was as if she was finally taking the reins of her own story. Night fell with a light rain that soon turned into a storm. The thunder made the old house tremble. Frank checked all the windows and doors before retiring to his room. Jessica remained in the living room, working on her laptop, organizing the documents for the next day. It was around 3 in the morning when the sound of tires in the mud alerted Jessica. Cautiously, she approached the window and pulled back the curtain a little. 3 headlights cut through the darkness of the rainy night. 3 vehicles had parked in front of the house. "Dad!" she called, running to Frank's room. "There are people outside." Frank got up with a start, already reaching for the shotgun he kept beside the bed. It was an old weapon, inherited from his father, used only to scare away predators that occasionally threatened the cattle. "Wake Sarah. Stay in the back room and lock the door." Jessica hesitated. "I'll call the police." "The nearest station is almost an hour from here. Do that, but first ensure your safety." While Jessica ran to wake Sarah, Frank positioned himself strategically near the front door, shotgun in hand. Through the side window, he could see 3 men getting out of the vehicles. He recognized one of them as being the same man who had observed the house days earlier, Eric. The other 2 appeared to be hired thugs. One of them carried something that gleamed under the moonlight. A gun. The knocks on the door were violent. "I know she's in there, old man," Eric's voice echoed, mixing with the thunder. "Hand over my wife and my child and nobody gets hurt." Frank remained silent, calculating his options. He had no illusions about the chances in a direct confrontation. "You have 5 minutes to open this door or we'll break it down." In the back room, Sarah trembled uncontrollably at the recognition of her husband's voice. Jessica, beside her, was already on the phone with the police. explaining the situation with the forced calm of a lawyer accustomed to crises. "We need immediate help. There are 3 armed men threatening to invade the property. One of them has a history of domestic violence against a pregnant woman who is under our protection." The response from the other end of the line was not encouraging. The available patrol car was attending another occurrence. It would take at least 40 minutes to arrive. "We don't have that time," Jessica insisted, but the officer only repeated that they would do their best. Suddenly, a crash. The front door had been forced. Male voices filled the room. Frank remained firm, the shotgun pointed. "Don't take another step. This is my property and you're trespassing." Eric, elegantly dressed despite the rain and the hour, smiled with disdain. "Where's my family, old man? Don't complicate things. Sarah and my son are coming with me, and you go back to your pathetic little life. Get out of my house now." Eric's smile disappeared. He made a gesture with his head, and the armed man advanced a step. "Do you really want to die because of a woman you barely know?" Eric asked, his voice dangerously low. "An ungrateful woman who will abandon you as soon as she finds someone better?" In the back room, Sarah felt a sharp pain. She surrounded her belly with her hands, stifling a moan. Jessica noticed the discomfort. "Are you okay?" "I think—" Sarah didn't complete the sentence. Another contraction, stronger, made her double. Over. When she straightened up, she noticed the moisture running down her legs. "The baby, I think it's the baby." Jessica paled at seeing the amniotic fluid mixed with blood. My God, her water broke. And she's bleeding. Panic took hold of Sarah. It was too early. There were almost 6 weeks left until the due date. The pain intensified, causing her to fall to her knees. At the same instant, the sound of a shot echoed through the house. It didn't come from the living room, but from outside. One of the thugs had fired into the air as a demonstration of power. "Next shot won't be upward, old man," Eric shouted. "I'm losing my patience." Jessica, faced with the medical emergency that presented itself, made a quick decision. She opened the bedroom door and shouted, "We need help. She's in premature labor." The declaration caused a moment of absolute silence. Eric, in the center of the living room, seemed momentarily disarmed by the news. Frank took advantage of the moment of hesitation to advance a few steps toward the corridor that led to the back room. "My son is being born?" Eric asked, his voice oscillating between authoritarian and confused. "She needs to go to a hospital immediately," Jessica replied, remaining partially protected by the wall. "She's losing blood." Eric gestured for his companions to approach. "We'll take her." "Where to?" Jessica challenged. "To continue the abuse after she gives birth?" "Mind your own business, lady. This is between me and my wife." Jessica, an experienced lawyer in confrontational situations, stepped forward, facing Eric directly. "We have documents, Eric. Evidence of aggression, recorded threats, witnesses. A judge has already been contacted for an emergency protective order. If you take Sarah now, you'll be committing another crime." Eric's expression hardened. "You don't know who you're dealing with, neither do you." While this clash was happening, Frank took advantage of the distraction to return to the room where Sarah was. The scene he found froze his blood. She was lying on the floor, pale, writhing in pain, a pool of blood forming beneath her body. "We need to get out of here," he whispered, kneeling beside her. "There's a door in the back that leads to the service area. From there we can reach the barn." Sarah weakly nodded, unable to speak due to the pain. With extreme care, Frank lifted her in his arms. His body, despite his age, still maintained the strength from years of hard work on the ranch. The rain was still falling heavily when they escaped through the back door. The path to the barn was short, but the mud made the journey dangerous. Frank advanced with determination, protecting Sarah as much as possible from the rain with his own body. Inside the barn, he placed her on a pile of clean hay. "Just hold on a little longer," he murmured, both to Sarah and to the baby who was struggling to come into the world prematurely. "I'll get the truck." But before he could leave, another violent contraction made Sarah scream. The sound, even muffled by the storm, was enough to alert the men in the house. "They're in the barn," the voice of one of the thugs echoed. Frank realized there was no more time. They would have to face the confrontation. He returned to Sarah's side, holding her hand firmly. "I won't let them take you." Tears mixed with sweat on Sarah's contorted face. "I don't want to lose my child, Frank. I can't lose him." The barn door was opened violently. Eric entered, followed by the two men. His eyes, when they found Sarah in the state she was in, showed a brief moment of genuine concern, quickly replaced by the habitual anger. "What did you do, you crazy woman?" he accused, approaching. "Look what your escape caused." Frank placed himself between them. "She needs a doctor, not accusations." "Get out of the way, old man. This isn't your problem." "It became my problem the moment I found her in the river." Eric's eyes narrowed. "In the river?" Sarah, gathering strength she didn't know she possessed, partially raised herself. "I'd rather die than go back to you, Eric, and if it weren't for this man, I would have succeeded." The silence that followed Sarah's declaration was broken only by the sound of rain on the barn roof and by her moans of pain. Eric's face, normally controlled and cold, showed a range of emotions: shock, confusion, and, for a brief moment, something close to guilt. "You tried to kill yourself?" he asked, his voice losing its habitual arrogance. Before Sarah could respond, another contraction made her scream. More blood flowed through the hay, alarming everyone present. "She's going to lose the baby if we don't act now," Frank stated urgently. Eric looked at his two cronies, then back at Sarah. Something in his gaze changed. "We'll take her to the hospital," he finally said. "My car is the fastest." "No," Sarah managed to protest between labored breaths. "I won't go with you." At that moment, Jessica entered the barn, soaked by the rain, but with a determined look. "The police are on their way," she announced, approaching Sarah. "And an ambulance, too." The thugs exchanged nervous glances. One of them approached Eric. "Boss, we have to get out of here." Eric hesitated, his gaze fixed on the woman carrying his child. For a moment he seemed torn between fleeing and concern for his heir. It was Frank who broke the impasse. "The hospital is almost an hour from here. The ambulance will take even longer in this storm. If we want to save the baby, we need to leave. Now." Eric made an abrupt gesture to his men. "Go back to the car, wait there." When they were alone, Eric, Frank, Jessica and Sarah, the businessman seemed to deflate. He was no longer the threatening man from minutes ago, but someone genuinely concerned. "My son can't pay for our mistakes." "Then help save him," Frank replied. Without further words, Eric helped carry Sarah to his luxurious car. Jessica insisted on accompanying them, occupying the back seat along with the parturient. Frank would follow in the pickup truck. "You go ahead. I'll inform the police of the new direction," he said, already running to his vehicle. The journey to the hospital was a nightmare of dangerous curves on rural roads soaked by the rain. Eric drove with fierce concentration, ignoring speed limits. In the back seat, Sarah alternated between moments of lucidity and semi-consciousness, her head resting on Jessica's lap. "Hang in there," Jessica whispered, squeezing the young woman's hand. "You're going to make it." When they finally arrived at the small-town hospital, Sarah was in critical condition. The medical team immediately took her to the emergency room. Eric tried to accompany her, but was barred by Jessica. "You don't have that right. There's an ongoing investigation of domestic violence." "It's my son," he protested. "That you almost lost due to your actions," Jessica retorted, implacable. "The police will arrive at any minute. If you have any decency, you'll wait here to provide clarification." Surprisingly, Eric didn't flee. He sat in the waiting room, head in his hands, his posture defeated. His thugs had disappeared, probably, fearful of the imminent arrival of the authorities. Frank arrived minutes later, soaked and breathless. He found Jessica near the reception. "How is she?" "They went straight to emergency cesarean. The doctor said it's serious. Significant blood loss, premature labor, extreme stress." "And him?" Frank pointed with his chin toward Eric. "Surprisingly, he's cooperating. I think he finally realized the gravity of what he did." The following hours were pure anguish. Frank walked back and forth in the hospital corridor. Jessica alternated between calls with lawyer colleagues and attempts to get updates from the doctors. Eric remained seated in the same place, oblivious to the comings and goings of police officers who came to take his statement. When the surgeon finally appeared, his face revealed exhaustion. It was a difficult operation, he explained to the three. The mother lost a lot of blood and needed a transfusion. We managed to stabilize her, but the next 48 hours will be crucial. And the baby? Eric asked, standing up. The doctor hesitated. Premature, with respiratory difficulties. He's in the neonatal ICU. He weighs only 4 pounds. His condition is delicate, but he's fighting bravely. Frank felt his legs weaken. He leaned against the nearest wall, trying to process the information. Can I see them? He asked in a choked voice. The mother is sedated and will remain so for a few hours. As for the baby, only one visitor at a time with all protection protocols. Surprisingly, it was Eric who said, "Let him go first." He looked at Frank with an indefinable expression. You saved her. You have that right. Dressed in sterilized garments, Frank entered the neonatal ICU. The sight of little Michael in an incubator, connected to tubes and monitors, broke something inside him. So fragile, so defenseless. He approached cautiously, observing the rhythm of the assisted breathing, the tiny fingers, the chest that rose and fell with effort. Hello, Michael, he whispered, placing his hand on the acrylic wall. You're a warrior, you know, just like your mother. Tears he hadn't shed for years ran down his wrinkled face. They weren't just tears of sadness or concern. They were tears of recognition, of deep connection. That small life had transformed everything, bringing meaning back to his solitary existence. In the days that followed, the small town was shaken by the events. Eric was formally charged with domestic violence and attempted breaking and entering. His thugs, located at a hotel in the vicinity, were also detained. The pressure from local media, added to Jessica's influence in legal circles, ensured that the case wasn't filed away or neglected like so many others. Sarah recovered slowly. When she finally fully awoke, her first thought was for her son. Michael? She asked, trying to sit up from the hospital bed. Frank, who was sleeping in an armchair next to her, woke up instantly. He's fine. He's gaining strength every day. He's a true fighter. The expression of relief on Sarah's pale face was like the sunrise after the storm. Silent tears ran down her cheeks. I dreamed I lost him. It was just a nightmare. He's here waiting to meet you. A nurse brought Michael to the room a few hours later, still small and fragile but no longer in constant need of the incubator. When Sarah held him for the first time, time seemed to stop. The immediate connection between mother and son was almost palpable. Frank observed from a distance, respecting that sacred moment. He has your eyes, he commented softly. Sarah smiled without taking her eyes off her son and his father's stubbornness. Look how he holds my finger. He doesn't want to let go. The mention of the biological father brought a momentary shadow. Eric was detained but had hired the best lawyers. The process would be long and painful. Don't think about that now, Frank advised, noticing her concern. Jessica is taking care of everything. You're protected. The recovery of mother and son proceeded with each day, bringing small victories. Michael began to gain weight consistently. Sarah regained her strength, both physical and emotional. And Frank divided his time between the hospital and the ranch, ensuring that everything was in order for when they returned home. Home. The word had a new meaning now. After 3 weeks, they finally received discharge. The return to Hope Ranch was a moment of discreet celebration. Jessica had prepared the baby's room, completing the last details that were missing. The garden, even with Sarah's absence, had prospered, as if nature itself collaborated with that new beginning. Welcome, Frank said, carrying the small hospital bag while Sarah entered with Michael in her arms. The house, previously silent and empty, now pulsated with new energy. Michael's occasional crying, the lullabies Sarah sang, the animated conversations during meals. It was as if life had returned after a long winter. With constant support from Jessica and her legal contacts, the case against Eric advanced. A definitive protection order was granted. He was prohibited from approaching Sarah or Michael under penalty of immediate imprisonment. His assets were partially blocked to guarantee child support for his son. He proposed an agreement, Jessica informed one afternoon, after another hearing. He wants to give up custody in exchange for occasional supervised visits when Michael is older. Sarah, sitting on the porch with the sleeping baby in her arms, reflected deeply. "What do you think?" she asked Frank, who was trimming the grass nearby. "I think Michael deserves to know his origins when he's ready, but the decision is yours, Sarah, only yours." She nodded, grateful for the absence of pressure. "I'll accept, with very strict conditions. Michael needs to know where he came from, even if that includes painful parts of the story." As the months passed, a new routine was established. Michael grew strong and healthy, enchanting everyone with his easy smile and insatiable curiosity. Sarah recovered completely, both physically and emotionally. The shadow of fear in her eyes gradually gave way to a luminous serenity. On a sunny spring afternoon, when Michael had completed 6 months, Sarah received a job offer. The rural school near the ranch needed a literature teacher. The principal, a longtime friend of Ellen's, had been impressed with Sarah's curriculum. The proposal brought an inevitable question. Staying would mean establishing definitive roots in that place, in that life shared with Frank. Leaving, even if to a nearby location, would represent a new beginning, independent and autonomous. The doubt was inevitable. Leave and start over. Again? Or stay and transform into a permanent home, that place where she finally felt human again? Frank, for his part, also faced his own hesitations. He loved Ellen's memory, and would always love her, but the present was no longer just mourning and survival. It was renewed life. It was the genuine desire to continue, to build, to love again. One afternoon he found Sarah sitting under the large maple tree, watching Michael, who was playing on a blanket spread on the grass. "When Ellen was very sick," Frank began, sitting beside her, "she made me promise 2 things. The first was to take care of her garden, and you fulfilled it. Actually, you fulfilled it. I just kept the plants alive. You brought the garden back to life." Sarah smiled, touched by the recognition. "And the second promise? That I would find the courage to be happy again." Frank paused, gathering courage. "It took 3 years for me to understand what that really meant, until I found you in that river." Sarah's eyes welled up. "You saved my life, Frank. And you saved mine." He gently took her hand. "I'm not asking for anything. I just want you to know that whatever your decision about the job, about staying or seeking your own path, this ranch will always be your home. Yours and Michael's." The choice was hers. With serenity and clarity that only great trials can bring, she decided to stay. Not out of necessity or gratitude, but out of love built patiently, day after day, on foundations of mutual respect and understanding. "I want to raise Michael here," she explained, as they walked together through the revitalized property. "I want him to grow up knowing this land, these trees, this river. I want him to learn the values you represent. And more than that—" Sarah stopped, looking directly into Frank's eyes. "I want to be cared for by someone who doesn't demand of me, but respects me. Someone who saw me at my worst moment and still saw value in me." Frank, moved, finally felt free of the guilt that tormented him. He wasn't betraying Ellen's memory. He was honoring her last wish, to find happiness again. "Are you sure?" he asked, still hesitant. "I'm much older." "Age is the least of our challenges," Sarah replied with a smile. "We've already overcome much worse things together." The wedding was discreet, but deeply symbolic. Jessica, who had become a constant presence in their lives, agreed to be Michael's godmother. Eric, fulfilling the terms of the judicial agreement, kept his distance, although he regularly sent child support and occasional gifts for his son. The house, which had once been just echo and absence, transformed into a chorus of laughter and conversations. The land responded to the new energy. Sprouts emerged where before there was only dryness. fruits ripened on previously sterile branches. The garden grew, expanding beyond the original limits planned by Ellen. On a particularly pleasant afternoon, as Michael took his first uncertain steps across the yard, Frank and Sarah observed, sitting on the porch. "You know what impresses me most," she commented, leaning back on his shoulder. "What?" "How life can completely change direction in an instant. When I entered that river, I thought it was the end, and in reality it was just the beginning." Frank nodded, understanding deeply. The old man finally understood that not every loss needs to be definitive, and that sometimes what begins with rescuing someone from dangerous waters ends with both learning to swim again, together. Michael toddled toward them, his little face illuminated by a smile that promised bright futures. A few meters away, the garden flourished in vibrant colors, as if Ellen from somewhere approved this new chapter with her silent blessing. Hope Ranch finally lived up to its name. The end of the story. Dear listeners, we hope that Frank and Sarah's story has touched your hearts. To continue this emotional journey, we've prepared a special playlist with equally moving stories. Find it right here by clicking to the left of the video. If you were moved by this narrative of new beginnings and hope, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give a like to the video. Every day we bring unique stories that explore the complexity of life and the beauty of encounters that transform destinies. Share your impressions about this story in the comments and tell us about